Welcome everyone. It's a rainy day, so thanks for the effort and sorry about the late start. We had to set up this right, so there's a webinar going on right now as well. People will be watching the presentation. So today I'm here with my dear guest speakers to speak to you about design and design excellence. Very important topic. We'll look at sustainability from a different angle today. To really see and appreciate how good design improves the sustainability. The way I envisioned this is we start with a global scale, share some best practices with you from different places in the world, how design improved sustainability. We have a transportation focus, but doesn't mean we'll go to rail lines and corridors and bridges, all that stuff. We will talk about how to move people and facilitate the move of people in a excellent design structure. So we'll start globally. We'll look at examples. We'll talk about some perspectives, and then we'll slowly narrow it down to our region and look at what we do in this region, and talk about some climate resiliency and how it really couples with good design. Okay. My name's Ersoy, Gulecoglu. I work at Metrolinx. I did this 5-6 years ago. I want to do it now again. Who knows? Who doesn't know Metrolinx? Please be honest. Okay. And you're local, or that's okay? That's why. Yeah. Metrolinx is the Transportation Authority, an agency of the government of Ontario in Canada. You may have taken the express train from airport to downtown. Metrolinx owns and operates that train as well. We operate the Presto card that I'm sure most of you now have it and are using it. We also operate the GO train and bus network in the region, and also do a lot of construction of the new LRTs, the light rail trains. Eglinton is one good example. We are building in Mississauga as well, in Hamilton and other areas. And there's this newly announced Ontario line that's in design and planning phase now. So that's Metrolinx. I worked there. I managed the sustainability team for about 4 years, 4+ years. And then now I'm in the coordination role for construction activities. During my time for sustainability, we developed Metrolinx's first sustainability strategy. You can see it online, Metrolinx/sustainability. Our first resiliency strategy, climate resiliency strategy. We established a multi-million-dollar energy management program for our facilities and as well as moving stock. And that was also an exciting program. We established a green team first time at Metrolinx and increased the number from 0 to over 600 now. And we have done many awareness campaigns through the green team on energy, water, waste, and to engage our employees and create champions. It was successful as well. We won a few awards in Canada. And today I have my guests. I know we started late. I don't want to speak too much, but I will ask them to maybe briefly introduce themselves. And then we'll go through small presentations by each of them. And I'm aiming to open for questions by 12 o'clock. And so we will have half hour after that for getting your questions and answering your questions. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay, let's try. Where do we start? Oya, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Oya Mercan. I am an associate professor at the University of Toronto Civil and Mineral Engineering Department, and I'm also the founding director of the newly established Center Climate Science for Engineering, and I'll try to introduce that briefly in today's presentation.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Latto. I'm Senior Manager of Design Standards at Metrolinx, and I work with Ersoy. In fact, sit very close to him, which is probably why he chose me to be here today.
Hello, my name is Nille Juul-Sørensen. I am the Global Director of Architecture for ARUP. ARUP is a world company doing all kinds of things in engineering and consulting and architecture. We have a huge team who's doing stations all over the world, so I work basically all over the world. I'm based now here in Toronto, mostly in Pearson Airport, I would say, but so I travel a lot to get Metrolinx open all over the world. I also work with Jeff a little bit on different things for Metrolinx here in Toronto.
It was a big week for Nille last week. They opened the Copenhagen Metro's extension, I believe.
Yeah.
And he's been working on that for
12 years.
12 years now. So that was a big milestone. And yeah, that was, and I also started my career at ARUP too. I think most of you would know that company. It's a big global engineering and design. And now they do probably more than when I worked there. Yeah. Big company. I think they did the Kansai International Airport, right? In Osaka, Japan. They built basically an artificial island and built an airport on top of it. Yeah. So let's start with Nille. He's the global lead for architecture for ARUP. And we'll speak a lot about stations, as I said, how we move people and how we create a good customer experience through design, and how that helps sustainability. So those would be the takeaways from this session. And then I'll pass it on to Nille now, and then we'll continue with Jeff after. There's the clicker.
So which one goes forward?
I think this one goes forward. Yeah. If it doesn't receive it, Nille, just this is the, and then there's a mic here. If you'd like, we can also hold this.
I'll just use that.
Yeah.
So this is the. I think it's quite difficult to talk about sustainability in rail because we use a lot of concrete. I'll come back to that. How do you actually measure sustainability? And sometimes you have to do something that's a little bit bad to gain a huge present 50 years down the line. So I come from a very small country called Denmark. In Denmark, we pay a lot of tax. Everything free. So you have free educations all the way through. You have, free healthcare and all these things. And because we pay a lot of tax, Danes do not accept low quality. When the state builds or state money is into it, the quality has to be at a certain level. Yes, it's been falling, but it's still up there. There's a lot of things we don't like. So when we talk about congestions in Denmark like this, it's never happened in Copenhagen because we actually, 5 years before, we tried to figure out how not to get in this problem. So in Denmark, we don't have any congestions. When I take my friends from London or other big cities into Copenhagen and I said, there's a lot of congestions, they're laughing. It's like the freeway here, it's packed. In Copenhagen, it's not that packed, maybe for 10 minutes. And the whole idea is that we calculate how much time do people lose not going to work, where they could have been productive for society. And when that comes to a certain level, then you kick in and then you build something that will take you out of your car, out of your congestion, get you faster to work. So that's how it operates. So also we love to bike. So it's very normal that the Prime Minister will bike to work. Everybody bikes to work. Business people, schools, kids, mothers with 2 kids, you know, and we bike in all kind of weather. So every time I'm here and people are saying, oh, I can't bike in the winter. Of course you can bike in the winter. You know, just have to get your beanie on, you know, and then on your bike and then you go. So it is a bike culture, and it's huge because everybody has a bike. It's not, some have flashy bikes, other ones have just, you know, really plain simple bike, but it's all about biking. It's like a Tour de France when you start. More people are getting hurt, you know, bike to bike than bike to car. The rule is whenever there's a car and a bike, it's the bike who have the upper hand. So you can bike down one-way street, and if a car's coming, then the car have to pull over. So that's the rule. It's always the soft people. Another thing we do is that we actually use public transport. Everybody uses public transport. And I can see in other countries, it's a cultural problem. Rich people do not take the public transport. This is my Prime Minister sitting there with a guy who's almost, it's her on the left, right? And then you have rock stars, so that is actually Iggy Pop and David Bowie. They take public transport in Copenhagen. And then there's you and me, babies, bicycles, God knows what people can put into a train. So everybody uses public transport to get around. As I said, to do these big things, you use a lot of concrete, you use a lot of digging, there's a lot of embodied energy, and we're trying to keep that down by actually figuring out how can we do the station as small as possible. So when you look at Toronto, it's long trains, it's big stations, right? But actually, and the same, I was just in San Francisco, and in San Francisco, the BART system have, you know, 120 meter long trains. They carry 120 million people a year. We do the same with a train who's 30 meters long. So it's all about how you figure out to run your trains and how you do it. And also the whole idea is if you actually make them small, if you start using natural ventilation and a lot of other things, then you can make them even smaller and you reduce the energy for running them. So this is the Copenhagen metro map. I've been working on this for 25 years. The yellow and the green line are in operation now. And then we just last Sunday, we opened the red one. Next year, we will open the blue one. And we are now started working on another line. And the whole idea is that these stations are placed in a medieval city. I mean, in the city. It's not somewhere where, you know, you can fit them in where there's a corridor. No. What we did was actually, we placed the station where people needs them. And then you do the spaghetti with the tunnels underneath. So instead of, a lot of times you have a corridor that's there for whatever reason, and then you put the station there, but no one's living there. So here it's a political thing that we say, okay, we need the stations to be here to get people around. We also need 2 stations here actually to start igniting that area who's maybe a little bit deprived. If we give them a station, we know everything will raise by 20% of consumer goods and everything in that area. So they're placed very politically. And then we find out how do we actually do all the spaghetti. And you see it looks like a little bit like a teddy bear, the yellow one. So that's actually how it looks in real life. But we are, you know, we're tunneling 20 meters from the Queen's Palace, right? There's a station 20 meters from the Queen. So you can go pop down. Everyone in Copenhagen have less than 600 meters walk to a station. They will pass buses. There'll be buses and other things between the 600 meters, but they can go get a train, a very fast train in 600 meters. It carries 1.2 million passengers a year. When we opened last Sunday, for the first 2 weeks, that's a 90% ridership. So that means Copenhageners just say, wow, it's like it's been there for 100 years. We just go in and everything is a lot easier. It connects the city in a completely different way. What we also did was that we know that as taxpayers who will never, ever go and sit in a train. You know, it's just against the way they think. So what we said was actually we give them 17 new plazas. So we change these things in the urban fabric. So everybody gets a benefit, even though you don't take the train or you take it very seldomly. You get a new plaza where you can sit, where you can play, where you can do all sorts of things. So 17 new plazas is involved in this. Then light. So how do we actually minimize the light? So what we did was that we completely tested all the materials that goes into the design of the station is tested for reflection. So I see a lot of places where they have sort of almost very dark floors, and then they put more and more light in, you know, because they want the light level to go up. Nothing happens because it's the floor who, all the light you see is reflected light, right? You never look into the lumiere, so you always see reflected light. So we're working with the reflected light. We're testing all the material that goes into these stations are tested, and this is just evenings where in the client's office and where we were sitting, you know, we actually had a platform almost there, so we could test all the panels, all materials for the reflection of the light. And what happens is that we have these skylights, so the whole system is fully daylit in minus 20 meters. There's a few stations where we can't have any daylight because it's actually underwater, but the rest of them, there's daylight. You can skate on them, you can do whatever, you can sit on them. And the cool thing is that they do all the ventilation. So in case of a fire, that skylight will lift up and all the smoke will get out. So that means that we've taken all the machinery who's normally, you know, heavy on energy out of here. We don't have that space in underground. So it's just very simple. And when you look at it from underneath, under these skylights is a sort of origami ceiling. So when you come into the stations, they're fully daylit. And the whole idea of the design is that I can see your eyes. And the reason for that is that I look the way I look, you look different. There's a punk rocker over there. There's another one there. There's one with a funny hat. You know, we're all different. But if you can see people's eyes, then you can see whether they're, you know, are they mad? Are they happy? Are they okay? Are they neutral? If you can't read the eyes, then you start getting a little bit unsecure. So these are just images from the station. So we also color-coded all the stations in a way. So if you get to a red station, you can actually change to a train that will take you to Paris. So these stations are red, they're completely red. It's the same module. All the stations have one module, so it's one kit apart. So we can change it. If anything happens, we can just change the module, put a new thing in. If they need a new door, we can put a new door in. So everything is into a kit of parts in all the stations, and 17 stations. And they're basically the same. They're like, you know, a mother and a father and, you know, son and daughters, uncles, and you also had the odd uncle and everything, but it's in there. So that's the red one. Then we have a green one. And the green one is actually placed in a space in Copenhagen. So what we've done is that we said that actually a platform has nothing to do with transport. You transport when you enter the train. But what happens is that platform is a space in the city. So it has to reflect the city, it has to belong. So this one is in an area where they have a lot of trees, part of Copenhagen where they have sort of, if you've been to Berlin, there's got a sort of this Berlin feeling, wider streets, a lot of trees, a lot of platinum trees. So that's colored into this. This is another one, an area where the Danes love brick. So we actually made 5 of the stations are made in brick. So, and to tell people that the brick is not working as a brick, it's just a tapestry actually. So we turned them upside down, and then we actually glazed half of it because a lot of the buildings around that area has glazed tiles. So what happens is that when the sun comes in and when the light comes in, you have this shimmering effect on the glazed tiles. And we have a black one because the black one is the party zone. So when you come to this one, this is where the sort of entertainment district is. And in daytime, it will just look black. At nighttime, when we put a lot of spots on, it's actually glass panels with their cross glass. So you have all these like diamonds, right? So when you're dressed up, the station dresses up. That's the whole idea. But again, fully daylit. When you arrive, you can see where you arrive. You don't arrive under a shopping center, God knows what. When you come up, you can see, so this guy on the horse, he was the one who founded Copenhagen. You have the church behind it, everything is sort of, you know, okay, I get it. And when you come into that station, that's a station that's under a canal, so it's very, very deep. It's 40 meters down, and canal boats and tourists are running on top of it. And it's just white panels, but they're glazed differently, and that's because it mimics the shimmering on the water when you have the sun coming in. There's a very high detail because architecture in these is 1 to 2% of the budget. It's nothing. So you can gold paint them. It wouldn't kick out on your spreadsheet. So it's not, a lot of times people say, okay, we need to save money on, materials, but the materials have to last for 100 years or 50 years, right? So it's all the materials are, either ceramics or it's marble or it's slate, all these things. So it's really material who gives us this. And this is a white station where you come in, all you see is white. So, so it's really a lot of lights on it. And when you come down, this is what you see. Boom. You got all the colors of football clubs because it's near the National Stadium. And this is what happens when you open, right? So the Queen gets the first round. And when she's out of the station, you open it. And it's 4 hours wait. They had to put signs in saying, when you take in the train once, could you please leave the station? And it was 17 stations. So the other one, that's a small station where people just, anxious to get in to see what is it, because they've been boarded off for 8 years. For 8 years, this project have been going on. Suddenly, the whole thing opened up with a fantastic takeover by passengers and social media and everything. And the whole idea is that we do this for passengers. And now there is no excuse for taking your car. There's no excuse for having a car if you live in Copenhagen, because you can actually rent a car if you want to go to IKEA or if you want to go somewhere with your kids. So thank you very much.
Good timing, Nille. I started looking at my watch. So I'll ask Jeff to continue from here on. Jeff and I, as he said, we work together. He's the senior manager for design and urban design and standard development at Metrolinx. And they've done really good work on developing standards and embedding sustainability into the standards. And Jeff's gonna talk about some of those and give some local examples and how the approach is, and actually how the approach is evolving, I should say, in Ontario. And it's very different from where we started a couple of years ago, and we are learning and we are applying, and there's new opportunities for us to apply these because there's multi-billion-dollar programs of infrastructure building. Jeff?
Yep, thank you, Ersoy.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So that's a tough act to follow because definitely what Nille presented with the city ring in Copenhagen is where we want to be quickly. But as a culture and as a city and a region, we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to public transit. I wanted to give an update though on just the work that we're doing in the design standards group at Metrolinx and how we are learning from examples around the world, and particularly through working with great teams like ARUP and Nille directly, we've been able to do some very good work in a very short period of time. But before I start talking about design standards, I want to give everyone really a big picture. This is what we're all working towards at Metrolinx. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the revised growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe that was released a couple years ago. Yeah. With revised density and demographic patterns, and the Ontario government has policies in place to accept and grow an economy around an additional 3 million people in this region in the next 25 years. And you can imagine that if we don't have very good transit networks in place, what that's going to do for congestion. So the response from Metrolinx to this growth plan is called Go Expansion. And Go Expansion is summarized in those 6 bubbles there. It really is about increasing service. It's about making service convenient and available all day, 15-minute service on some lines, and having improved facilities. And that's where our group comes into play.
What we're really ultimately trying to do is develop a cultural change. And Nille hinted at this, that as Canadians, as people who live in the GTHA, we need to have better accessible transit. And a lot of our design standards are focused on that. So there's a bit of a glitch there on the title of this slide, but these are the changes that you're going to see as a user of Go Transit. We're going to be moving away from a kind of face-to-face interaction with our customers and the service counter experience to more self-sufficient, a more independent transit user. We're going to have a station ambassador that's going to roam stations, and that will be your go-to point for any kind of trip planning or information. We thought that we would be developing fare exchange machines in a fare exchange environment that's custom and tailored and beautifully detailed. The reality is that this technology is changing so fast and so quickly that we can't keep pace. And what we're moving towards is really developing spaces that are highly flexible. The image on the right shows what we call our self-serve hub that we're bringing on board with the new design standards. And frankly, we're just placing machines freestanding, knowing that that technology is going to change rapidly. And soon this space won't even be used for fare exchange. It's very likely that that will actually happen once you get on the fleet itself. We're also rethinking how we plan stations. There was a time where a Go station was a Go station was a Go station. And we had one template, it was a one size fit all. And now we're moving towards thinking about developing a more modular approach to the planning of our station and to the construction of our stations. And that will allow us to accommodate a variety of new services that will be tailored to each location. And lastly, we're going to be building in more urban environments. This is a very interesting slide because it shows two renderings of the same project. The one on the left is using our current thinking around station buildings and customer experience, whereby the customer is funneled through the station building. It becomes iconic. It becomes a large urban marker. It's where you go through, you get processed, and then you walk out to your platform. The reality is that if we're going to accommodate very accessible transit in our urban fabric, that the image on the right is more suitable, whereby the customer has direct access to the platform. They have independence from any need to go into the station building, and we can make their transit experience a lot more easy and accessible. The image on the right was done by Nille as well. So we have a suite of design standards now, and they're available on the Metrolinx public website. We have 4 developed already. We have a plan to do 12 more over the next 3 years. I'm not going to talk about the first one, which is a joint development guideline, because it's still in development and there's still a lot of tweaking to be done. But I am going to talk about the other 3. So we have a universal design standard, and this is a standard that is designed to fill the gaps between current legislation around accessibility. I'm sure everyone in the room is familiar with the Ontario Building Code and the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And there's also CSA Canada Standard Association requirements around accessibility. However, there are still a lot of gaps in that legislation, and our standard here is designed to fill those gaps. So we have some principles that we speak to. You can read them up there. I don't need to read it for you. But again, it's about promoting accessibility for all to transit. And there's a very good book done by Kat Holmes called Mismatch. I would highly recommend everyone read it. She talks about how all of us in our lifespan are going to go through some various forms of mobility. Of course, when we're young, it's not an issue, but you're a mom with a kid on one hand and a shopping bag in another, all of a sudden you have a mobility issue. You break a leg or you have a bad knee one day, you have a mobility issue. I mean, we go through mobility issues all the time, and we need to design our transit network to respond to that. Simple things like just indicating that there are various clearances required for various modes of mobility, and that there's often a kind of blind spot to this in existing legislation. So we pick that up. Very simple things as well, making sure that there's always a tactile indicator at the top and the bottom of a ramp and at the top of a stair. Simple things like that that actually current legislation don't cover off. We pay particular attention to tactile wayfinding, which will be in our stations, including both French and English Braille. And we have some unique features that we're bringing forward, like a service area, an area for service animals at our stations, which you might argue is not a big kind of windfall perhaps as building business, but it is responding to the fact that many of our travelers do have service animals and they need to be considered. So very quickly to the wayfinding design standard. So wayfinding is critical to our customer experience. And as we look to have an integrated transit network within the region, within the Greater Golden Horseshoe, it was incumbent upon us to develop a wayfinding standard that would be applicable to all areas of this region. There's some very simple principles that we're bringing forward. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the Waze app, which is a navigation tool that I use a lot to get through the city. It's based on a principle called progressive disclosure, whereby you give the user the information they need at that point in time to make the right decision. Do they need to know where they're going to be 25 minutes down the road? Not really, but you give them the information that they need right now. We also outline a lot of principles around the planning of wayfinding and make sure that those who are building transit projects in the region are fully aware of the questions that our customer asks at various points in their journey. We set out very kind of clear, definitive sign typologies, and you'll be seeing these more and more throughout the region where there will be consistency. So we have threshold markers. We have what we call info hubs on the left-hand side, which are maps that show not only the network, but also points of interest around each station. And of course, the typical signage that you would expect for amenities and directional facility signage, and of course, bus stops as well. Last but not least, we have operational signage, of course, and digital signage. We're going to be coming out with a lot more robust digital signage that's going to give a lot more detailed trip information. And this is important because as we build our network on any given platform, there won't be a consistent route. We're going to have dynamic platforms whereby various routes with various stops are going to be using the same platform. So it's important that we bring forward a very clear and robust digital signage strategy. We also lay out very clearly where these typologies need to occur on the customer journey and likewise within our station environments. And lastly, this slide shows the new network identifier. That's the T in a circle on the left-hand side. That's going to be brought forward as a consistent moniker for transit throughout the whole region, regardless of whether it's bus or train or LRT. There's always going to be a T symbol outside a station in the region so that as users, as visitors, there's going to be a clear identifier for transit. Okay, the last one I'm going to go through very quickly is the architecture design standard for GO stations. This one we worked with Nille on quite closely. And I apologize for the format of the slide, but there's supposed to be some, really kind of eye-catching title there, but we'll kind of pass on that. But what we're bringing forward again, as I mentioned earlier, is a modular design approach to stations. And this allows project teams to build just what is needed. One of the principles that we worked on with Nille was this idea of compressing our infrastructure, making it right-sized for the services at each location. The platform access module, this is the first one, is a very simple layout with the self-serve hub, elevator, and stair. That's the only components in this module. And again, we're just trying to get the customer through an access point to a platform as quickly as possible. Now that's coupled with the station ambassador module, which sits next to it. And there's a very consistent layout. Again, we're trying to make it very compact. We don't really see a lot of our passengers spending time here, but if they do, we want them to be comfortable and we want it to be very legible. So here's the image that you saw earlier. This is the self-serve hub. This is in the platform access module that you'll experience on your way to the platform. The station ambassador is clearly identified as with a brand image. We just have yellow right now as a placeholder, but soon there'll be some kind of consistent brand color or pattern, and that's where you can go for trip planning assistance. The waiting area is very familiar, and there's very little change to that as well. And then when it comes to what our stations are going to look like, picking up on the modular approach, we're using different types of architectural expression for each module. So you can see on the left-hand side, the platform access module is very transparent. It's got the canopy and the facility name. So this is clearly where you're going to go as a user of this station. Next to it, less transparent, but still with some glazing, is the station ambassadors module. And then lastly is the support module. And the previous one was for a tunnel approach. This is for a bridge, and therefore it's higher, and it's to bring the customer up and over the corridor. And that's it. So thank you. I know that was a kind of long, kind of very detailed, tried to be high-level approach overview to our design standards. But again, they're available on the Metrolinx website, and look forward over the next 3 years for 12 more. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll invite Oya. I particularly asked Oya to join us today because of the new center that she founded at UFT for climate change and resiliency mitigation. It's still a new center, an institute, but there's a lot of need for that in our region. A platform where we can all contribute and share knowledge and data to make good decisions as we build this multi-billion-dollar program and preparing our cities in this region for the changing climate and extreme weather that we've already been experiencing. So it's very central what she's doing. And of course, aside from this, Oya has been doing research on other areas, and she's also received a Hart professorship recently. That's a great success. And Oya is going to talk about the new center and her other research areas on making our region more resilient. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ersoy, for the introduction. So I'll talk about a transdisciplinary focus on climate change and infrastructure. The only thing I want to also emphasize is that by training, I'm a structural engineer. My experience is in structural dynamics, earthquake engineering, and wind engineering. But more recently, we have been working as a group within the Faculty of Engineering and Faculty of Arts and Sciences to found a center, and which is what I'm going to quickly introduce today. So you might remember in 2013, within only a couple of hours, there was 106 millimeters of rain, which caused 1 billion in insured property damage and a lot of uninsured property damage in our city. And this catastrophic flooding did not only affect the transportation, but it also caused major problems in electrical infrastructure and local economy. Similar challenges exist in other infrastructure sectors. For example, our current code, building code, relies on the past climatic data for example, wind and snow, with explicit acknowledgement that it may not reflect the future with the climate change we are experiencing. Also, with the rising extreme temperatures, Canadians already are spending more time indoors, which makes the indoor air quality and environmental factors of grave importance. And we need to better understand the impact of relative temperature and humidity at the building level so that we can come up with new building envelope designs to mitigate the effects of climate change by reducing the energy use. And on the right-hand side here, we are looking at the plot by IPCC. The top line shows us different scenarios for future emissions. And you can see that there's a wide range. And the red line is the one if we don't do anything and proceed with what we are doing. And the blue one is if we do, if everyone agrees to the Paris Agreement. And in response to this, if you look at the global average surface temperature, there is a wide range of change also. So if you had a chance to listen to the today's keynote presentation by Professor Homburg, he emphasized that universities are great places for basic science and knowledge generation, but transdisciplinary research and transdisciplinary science is not readily available. So the center that we established is uniquely to give us an opportunity to do transdisciplinary research so that we can address some of the challenges due to the climate change. It has been established in March of this year through an internal grant. So this center will provide the much needed opportunity to address the challenges around carbon accounting, greenhouse gas mitigation, adaptation efforts in a transdisciplinary environment. And we also have a mandate to provide educational programs. And we seek to always develop strategic partnerships with public and private stakeholders. Here is a list of the current members of the center. But I like to usually look at this in a slightly different form. In this figure, you can see up top, we have our colleagues from climate science, from Department of Physics, Center for Global Change Science and School of the Environment. In the middle, we have the engineering infrastructure. And there are colleagues from civil and mineral engineering with different expertise: sustainability, water systems, transportation, building science, air quality, structures. We also have colleagues from ECE and chemical engineering. And as I'll talk briefly in the next slides, we are looking at different scales: regional, urban, and building scale. And we also have colleagues from architecture, sustainability, and political science, so that we have sustainability and public policy component for the research that we execute. One of the challenges of climate change research to produce actionable knowledge by the practitioner is the scale challenge. The global climate models, they model the entire Earth or the continent, but if we are thinking about a connection in a building due to an extreme wind event, there is a huge scale mismatch. And we need to first downscale the climate information to a regional or local level as much as possible. And there are techniques for that, statistically or dynamically. And then we need to interpret that in such a way that it can become an engineering input to a relevant problem. And for that reason, we have pilot projects that look at this type of problems at the building level, at neighborhood level, and at the regional level. The rest of this presentation, I'll talk about a research within our center that is relevant to transportation. And this research is by Dr. Arman Ganji, who is also the manager of the center, and Professor Marian Hatsopoulou, who is an executive team member of our center. And it is a tool that calculates the traffic emission, greenhouse gas emission, or other pollutant emission in Toronto. And it is called TEPS2. And they have previously developed another tool called TEPS1, which actually calculates the amount of traffic on all the 60,000 roads within Toronto. So TEPS2 builds on that, and it calculates the total emission, total annual average daily traffic, total vehicle kilometers, and emission intensity. And it considers 3 types of pollutants: greenhouse gas, nitrogen oxide, and particulate matter, PM2. And as you can see, for every year from 2006 to 2016 on this plot, we can see the concentration of greenhouse gas emission, particulate matter, or nitrogen oxide on all the major and minor roads within the city. One valuable property of this tool is that it enables the user to perform scenario analysis. So you can select individual roads, the expressways, minor, major roads, and within the downtown area, and you can increase or decrease the amount of traffic you predict in that road. And the program can tell you the corresponding effect on the total emission. What will happen, for example, if downtown local roads are going to experience 20% more traffic? You can see the distribution of the total emission on each of the different roads. And it also gives you this as a text file so that you can process the data. And if you have any questions about the center, I would be happy to answer. And we have a website also. It is csedep.ca. If you visit our website, you can see more about our pilot projects and our educational plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello? Hello? Yeah, perfect timing. Oh yeah, this is, as we aimed, it's 12 o'clock. So I would like to open up for questions. I hope you found interesting information and perspectives in these presentations. And I'm sure you have some questions for our panelists. Who would like to kick us off? Go ahead.
It's a question for
Can everyone hear, or I can bring the microphone? Everyone can hear? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the question is, beyond fossil fuels, people are thinking about electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, as a possible way forward once gasoline and diesel become too expensive or unavailable. So in your models, have you begun to look at emissions as electric vehicles are phased in? Is this part of your thinking about projections into the future?
That is correct. And in the scenario analysis of this tool, you can introduce different type of vehicles also. It actually belongs to the TEP1, where you can change the vehicle types. So it is built into the tool as well. And apart from that, within the center, we have a new pilot project that looks into the efficiency of electric vehicles under the climate change effects also, because apparently those vehicles, their efficiency is adjusted to a certain temperature change. And we have a pilot project that is looking into how that efficiency is going to change as the temperature range changes as a result of the climate change.
Another question? Go ahead.
Excuse me. Thank you all for your presentations. I have a couple questions if that would be permitted.
Of course, yeah.
In your sort of breakdown of the different departments and whatnot, or perhaps I should back up, sorry. I'm curious to know what in particular you might mean by transdisciplinary as an idea. And then in the schematic that you had developed or shown about who fits in where and who's bringing different aspects, I couldn't help but notice that in some aspects there wasn't much in there that drew my attention to the idea of something like cultural social sustainability, how that impacts someone from culture, arts, social sciences, humanities, and as well as there was nothing in there that pointed a direction in terms of indigenous waste. So I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on that, sort of how do these kind of concepts fit into that paradigm, and if there's any if that's taking place.
Yes. The transdisciplinary aspect of the center comes from the fact that when we define a research project, for example, the pilot project that I'm leading has something to do with the wind load estimation for year 2050. So if I were going to do this research within my own group, I would just have taken some estimation. I would just say what will happen if it increases 10%, if it decreases 5%. And I could have done the analysis of the structures within my own group. But since we are trying to do the research in a transdisciplinary way, we are working with climate scientists, atmospheric physicists. They do take their global climate model data, scale it down to Toronto, to a specific building that we are interested on King Street. And we are using their estimate, which is the best knowledge available currently for year 2050. So by working with climate scientists, instead of just making the assumptions within the engineering community, we are taking a step forward to establish the transdisciplinary aspect of the center. And as I mentioned, we just established this center in March, and the graph that I showed you is the core group which worked with me to get the funding to get it started. And if we have future funding that can enable us to add more components, to look into social aspects, indigenous aspects, we would be thrilled to do that, but it all depends on how successful the center will be, and in the future, how much funding we will be able to receive for specifically what type of research and educational activities.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Yeah, now, because in private we do this. ARUP is famous for working completely integrated. We have something called total architecture or total design. So when we actually design anything who has to do with mobility, it's not engineers who's designing it. It's a lot of people who know something about social structures, social economy, urban fabric. How do we make it belong? Who are the people who are there now? Who are the people that should stay? Who are the new ones? So we actually start with a completely different entry into a station or a mobility hub. And also, a couple of years ago, it was very easy because you had a train, you had a car, and you had a bike. Now we added on whatever drones, what will be in the future. So how do these mobility hubs look completely different? And at the same time, so in Auckland, I'm working with the Maoris and a different Maori family for each station. because they have to belong in their culture to that specific place. And in the beginning, I thought, oh, this is going to take a long time. But if I have to be honest, it's been the most fantastic experience because you learn a lot about how you actually deal with things that is not in the engineering world or in the sort of, the materialized world. And I think all these things we bring back into our project. So when we have these experiences, we come back to the team and say, hey, this is a different way of doing things. So to me, I think that universities are starting on it because the university is actually very siloed. If you, in the real world or whatever we call it outside, if you work in those silos, you will not going to achieve anything in the climate crisis. From now on, it has to be mixed teams of mixed people with mixed education, mixed backgrounds who can contribute to this.
Building off that, and I do appreciate the mention towards accessibility, mobility, and stuff as a visual impaired person is an important part. But I guess my deeper concern, or at least something that struck me a little bit odd, but I do understand why, but I would like maybe either yourself or Jeff to comment on it, but the measure of the need for transit is always based on a measure of loss of productivity. And I guess what concerns me about that is that what gets lost or what isn't being spoken in that when we think about the need for transit is for the need for productivity, doesn't it sort of, I'm wondering what it tells us about maybe the priorities of society, but also at the same time, what does it tell us or doesn't tell us about actually why people need to move as opposed, right? So if the marker is always productivity, then we're simply concerned about getting people to do their jobs or to become productive in, I guess, in economic sense, because a lot of the discussion also sort of rotated around the need for economic development around that. So I'm wondering if you could maybe explain why this is the marker that both of you seem to have put out there. But again, and what does this risk us not doing?
I think you use it as a marker because the people you're talking to, where you get the funding from, that's their marker. I think transit has two things. It will take you out. You're actually doing something good for yourself because you're going from A to B faster. So whatever you want to do, when you come to B, you'll be there before. You can also stay longer at A if that's more fun before you have to go to B because it takes you there. So what happens is that, of course, governments and other institutions, they want to see the cash because they actually invest in it. When do they get the return on investment? And of course, you can calculate that. What you can't calculate is what happens in cities when you start connecting cities in a different way. And as a human being, we are quite curious about what's going on in Mississauga, what's going on, in other parts of Toronto or whatever, any city. So I can travel there very easily. There's no excuse for me not traveling there and see what do that look like? Can I be inspired and take that back to my community? So I think, yes, and that one you cannot calculate because it's not a caste culture. That's about how we live together, how we learn from each other's community and how we learn from each other as human beings, and we open our mindset. So I think there's these two things, but the one that we use, of course, is because we need to get some funding from somewhere, right? And by the way, I think most, I'm not sure, but most infrastructure projects like, running metro in Copenhagen is not very profitable. If you calculate it, then your ticket price will go up. It seems that it's more profitable if you don't pay if it's free, because then you'll have even more people coming in. So you have all these methodologies of calculating things. To me, that's the political thing. What I really care about is about people that I can actually, there's no excuse. I haven't had a car for 15 years. Never used it. And here when I'm in Canada, everybody asks me, you don't have a car? And they look at me like, I'm a stranger complete. I said, no, why should I have that? Because there's a bus and there's a train and I can, there's an Uber, so I think it's that change that these things helps, and they're very difficult in calculating.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's a really good question. And of course, it really does get to the core of kind of who we are politically in Ontario and in Canada as Canadians. And you know, we do have great difficulty doing big projects if it's not based on a kind of economic benefit. And it's always been a challenge for us in developing design standards for us to come up with a cost benefit model for, say, providing greater accessibility. How do you put a number to that? And unfortunately, it's required. It's kind of the MO, if you will, of our current government regime right now, where everything is seen as an investment and ultimately then a return on investment. And it's very difficult. That's all I can say. It's very, very difficult that, you know, we have yet to find any research, and maybe this room could help us, that puts monetary value to good design. I'm an architect. I've been taught good design. It doesn't really have a financial value, but it has clarity, it has elegance, it has legibility, it has, you know, it has values that are very hard to put an economic value on. And all I can say is that it's a very difficult conversation that we have within Metrolinx when we try and elevate the customer experience, while at the same time we have to demonstrate that it gives value, economic value. So your question's a good one, and we're still scratching our heads.
You're also looking at it from a competing priorities perspective, right? Like in our organization, good design is good design, and everyone recognizes, and there's a budget allocated. But when it comes to real projects, then you know, where do you really allocate the funding, which is more important, this or that, to meet the requirements, to meet the, you know, the revenue requirements, to meet the building code and all that, versus these things, because we face that for sustainability as well. You know, we come up with a lot of good aggressive measures, and some of them are cut down because it requires some initial investment. I think you had a question.
Yeah, it actually ended up having a lot of overlap with where your question went, but the contrast when you're talking about Copenhagen versus what we're doing in Ontario, the contrast I heard was how Copenhagen is designed for beauty, that we've made the stations reflect the neighborhood, and we've created these public spaces that feel valuable to people. And in Toronto, I heard a lot that's great, but also about like how it's designed for efficiency and logic and check boxes of this does this and this serves that purpose. So I wonder if this is a true contrast, that there is less room for beauty and appreciating the space and people's feeling the space in what we're doing in Ontario, and if so, why, and maybe how it was made the case. I know you mentioned that people pay a lot in taxes, so they expect high quality, if that's how the case was made, but GO service is fairly expensive, so it seems like there must be a little more to it than that.
I think the stations we've done in Copenhagen are the most straightforward, absolutely so simple. You get straight to the train. There's no turning, no nothing. You just bang on. And that's the whole idea. In Denmark, if it's not working, if it's not functional, then it can be as beauty as ever. People just don't use it. And that's also why if you actually look at a lot of games, a lot of apps that comes out of Denmark, they are pretty well designed, because Danes, if it's not working, if you have to click more than 3 times, they're out. So it's the same thing in stations. If you have to read more than 3 signs, that they say it's not working. Even it is working. So it's all about stripping things down to be very, very efficient. So the metro in Copenhagen is extremely efficient. But what we have also done is that we actually put a lot of effort in. So for the two minutes that we have you in a station, we want to give you something that you don't get at home. There's some kind of experience, and that's what we call design, that's what we call architecture. But it's also designed in a way that I will move you forward when I like you to move forward. I designed it so when you stand on the escalator, it's a beautiful space that you're standing in. And I think all that is not related to any financial. It's about how do you think things. I think it's a lot easier in Denmark because the operational of stations that we use to operate stations in the middle of a medieval city, you cannot get a truck into the station, right? And I think working in Toronto is that you will get there, but there's a way, how do we get there? And you're not going to do it overnight, but because there's a lot of things that have to change. And I think sometimes we're not good enough as citizens to actually be in campaign mode. I think it's really weird that it's a 14-year-old girl who's actually changing the talk of town and not students who are in universities, right? It's just in Hong Kong and a 14-year-old, that's the one who's really up there fighting for something, right? So I think we have to be campaigning. You have to be campaigners, because you're the one who's going to use the system, saying this is not good enough. But make that critique a positive one, because that will move Jeff in the direction, right? Because that will move things, right? So I think that's how we see it. So the stations at Copenhagen is much more efficient than they are here.
Nille and I, we've had conversations around this, and sometimes it's just a simple way of how you do project management that can change the outcome. And I was impressed when Nille told me that for the City Ring project in Copenhagen, the stations were budgeted at the beginning, and everything that was related to customer experience was set aside. There was a budget for that. And as he mentioned, it was 1% to 2%, not much, but it was protected. The other 97, 98%, 99% was, of course, the civil works. And they were separate contracts. And if the civil works went over budget, which it always does, it was up to the civil team to come up with mitigating procedures, reduce costs, whatever. They didn't touch the quality side. And as Nille put it, if you do that, then you're going to end up with the station that you wanted in the first place. At Metrolinx, and very much, I've been involved with a lot of projects, but at Metrolinx, everything is lumped into one kitty. And guess what happens, right? You're looking for savings as you're doing a lot of your civil works, because again, it goes over budget. It's inherently going to go over budget. And where do you look? You look to grab money that's already allocated to the project, i.e. the architectural finish and the customer experience. And maybe that speaks to the fact that we don't value that part of infrastructure that much. And to Nille's point, we need to be better champions for it. But I'm now very mindful that the way you can do something has a huge impact down the road. And again, it's cultural. It's just that we don't value that customer side that much. We're getting there. And I think that if we're going to get out of this logjam where we are so car dependent, we're going to have to do it by designing not only efficient public transit, but also, to Nille's point, something that you can experience that you wouldn't otherwise experience. Right, thank you. So this might surprise the room, but Metrolinx Go are the largest owners of parking lots in North America. Which is just staggering. and it speaks to kind of old thinking, I guess. With respect to designing stations now for emerging technologies, particularly on-call mobility, if anyone has used a GO station, everyone should be familiar that there's a pickup and drop-off area. We call it PUDO, which is going to be rethought so that it actually expands as demand is needed. So we pretty much have fixed properties now. I think it's going to be very hard for us to buy more property for parking, and that's just not sustainable. And we recognize, and our customers are asking for it too, that we need to develop these pickup and drop-off areas as central and a priority on our sites, and also able to expand. So we're coming up with new design standards on that. It's very timely, your question. We're thinking about how to do this so that it's, by being a standard, it can't be challenged, it can't be de-scoped from a project, it actually has to be implemented. So definitely that type of mobility is a focus for us, and we're recognizing that we've got to take away parking capacity in order to accommodate a lot of this new technology, and I think it's a good thing. And the more that we make parking harder, then I think the more that will bring about change.
Can I add to this that I think there's a lot of times we go down to the station, right? But I think, you know, you have to go up in the helicopter and look at Toronto as a big metropolis. How do you do the best form of public transport so you get the cars out? On one hand, you have these endless single-family houses areas. Then you have a city center that's growing, that's getting more and more compact, will be more and more compact. So, and then when I see solutions, then it's either flying helicopters or God knows what, who's really sort of futuristic, right? Yeah, that will probably come. But what do we do in the next 50 years? And I always see huge projects like we cut through with TTC or Metrolinx with stations who are 300 meters long, really big thing. Instead of saying, okay, what happens if everything should be smaller but faster and more of it? So how can you connect Toronto in a completely different way if you start saying that you don't have to, for years everything has to go through Union Station, right? Now everybody realized that was not such a smart idea, but that's, all cities have done that thing. So, but how can you actually connect it, Do you need to have an 8 that's running in the city? Do you need to have, is it like a flower where they meet differently, So I think it's about you as young people starting, get up in that helicopter and come up with something, because Jeff is in his organization, looking at it that way. I come from that perspective, and you have people who are into trains and corridors. They just look at the corridor. They don't care about the city. They just look at the corridor. Okay, we can put tracks in here, right? But if you take a completely different attitude to it, saying, okay, I would like to connect X, Y, and Z, because that's more interesting. And then you will see a pattern of a city who can work completely different. Some of it have to be buses, other things have to be underground, something have to be electrical, and that, it's not one thing fits all. But I think what I'm really looking for Toronto is someone who fixes this, because if you can fix that, then there's no reason for that Metrolinx. They could actually sell all their parking lot, and we can build affordable housing next to the station, really easy access. But right now, there is no plan. So there's always the car is in there. But if you actually start thinking, from a really, high level, what could it look like if we didn't have all the boundaries that we have, because we come out of a tradition, and we're probably also too old and all these things.
We only have 5 minutes, so I'll take a last question. Please, brief question. how to promote public transportation in during winter and harsh weather. And yeah. 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 Would
So
like to
yeah,
answer.
no, it's so we've had conversations about this as well, but we do customer surveys quite regularly. Like we're constantly trying to understand the customer's needs. The number one thing that they ask for is heated shelters. You know, they don't, I mean, washrooms are kind of second and better service is third, but they just want heated shelters. So when we were working on the design standards, and we recognize that the whole platform environment is very complicated and we're going to have to develop it separately from what we just showed you today. So we're currently thinking about the platform environment right now. But Nille kept asking these questions to us. He said, like, you know, why do you guys have canopies on your platforms everywhere? And well, they're not everywhere, but it's what we are doing more and more. And we said, well, it's to protect, you know, customers from shade and rain, but also from blowing snow. And we kind of realized, if we were really honest with ourselves, that they really don't work very well. And yet we think they do. And that, you know, this is the great danger, is that you come up with something and you can do it for the next 50 years thinking that you've solved it. But bringing in Nille and his experience in working in projects in Switzerland and Scandinavia, we were referencing, he said, they get more snow than you guys and they don't build canopies. You know, they have a couple of shelters and that's it. You know, the platform's got snow on it, whereas we're diligently trying to remove the snow. We're worried about slip and falls and litigation and all that stuff, right? So yeah, you raise a very good point. It seems like a fairly simple solution, and I think we're going to be headed more towards having more shelters, more heated shelters. There's even talk about air conditioning in shelters, and less about canopies, and just get, you know, put that idea off to the side because it's not working.
You know, I can say we've had really heated conversation around this. And a lot of cold wind between us. No, because I was sort of introduced, it was introduced to me that I came from somewhere else who didn't know anything about snow. And it really upset me, right? It was not Jeff, it was other parts of Metrolinx, you know, who just said, you know, you don't know anything about snow. And I thought, what the heck, right? So I just took the Swedish design manual and the Swiss and the Austrian and the Norwegian and put them in front of Jeff and say, can you find anywhere where the heat trades the platform, where they have all these canopies, you know, where, how do they do snow management? How do they do parking? And there is not in there. So, and then I realized that there is a huge cultural differences of how you envision public transport in the continent and here, because this is a lot more car culture. There's a lot of other things. So I think what we're doing is that we're taking you on a journey that, you know, I asked the, you know, all the stupid questions to Jeff, you know, why do you have canopies, right? You know, they're not working. So what it could be, you know, if we can actually minimize the stations, then we can maybe get the fare down, right? Because the whole idea, if the fare is cheap, then you take it, right? So there's this boundary also. So why do you want to deliver this luxury that no one is using, right? In city ring, none of the metro stations in Copenhagen have toilets. Because we don't want to have toilets because they're used of people who are not using them for toilets, right? And that means that if you have to go to the toilet, you know, they're not vacant anyway, right? So there's these things that you have to discuss, and I think Metrolinx is moving in that direction, you know, questioning everything, because I mean, rail and transport is a lot about tradition. It's built of layers of tradition, and there's a lot of emotional also in it that, you know, has to be a clock. You know, a platform is a place where we have greeted people and we said goodbye to people that we love. So there's all these layers that comes in, and we have to unpack that and then pack it again and find out what are customers ready to lose now or to do different now, right? So canopy is one thing, you know, we said, you know, why don't we just have a few shelters where you can stand, right? I mean, some of these stations, they do not have 1 million people in a day, right? So make them small. And so I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of questions, but there's also a lot of cultural questions. And when are Metrolinx ready to say, we do it now? Because it could also backslash, right? I'm always laughing at Jeff and saying the best thing is if we could actually get the car into the train, right?
Okay, we'll end there. Thank you so much for coming to this panel. I hope that it was informative for you. So I'll ask one last thing, a round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, and hope you enjoy the rest of this conference and your lunch.